Hello, and thanks for joining me. My name is Marie Helweg-Larsen, and I'm a professor of psychology and the Glenn E. and Mary Line Todd Chair in the Social Sciences at Dickinson. I'm actually coming to you from England right now, where I am serving as the director of Dickinson Science Program at the University of East Anglia. So I am supervising the science students who are here for the semester, and I'm teaching them a course on the history of science, and then they take 3 courses at the University of East Anglia. So today I'll speak to you for about 10-15 minutes, and then I'll answer your questions you might have at the end. You can type them in at any time, but I will answer them at the end. You might have questions about stress or hygge or happiness or Toot, but not about Brexit. I'm definitely not answering any questions about Brexit. All right, so us Danes are some of the happiest people in the world. We consistently score in the top 3 to top number 1 on worldwide happiness surveys, and we have done so for decades. So why are Danes happy? Well, they're happy because they have things that make people happy around the world. They have a stable government, they have low levels of public corruption, and they have access to free, high-quality education and healthcare. They also have a high degree of trust in each other and the media and their government. But Danes also happen to have a lot of cool words for ways to be happy. So you might have heard about hygge, which has been the subject of countless books and articles and commercials. It's often mistranslated to mean cozy, but it really describes, I think, the process of creating intentional intimacy. And this kind of intimacy can happen when you have a safe, balanced, and harmonious shared experience. So hygge can happen when you make the choice to put away distractions and devices and instead spend it on being with other people. And hygge does not have to involve warm socks or fireplaces, despite what you might have heard. And it is pronounced hygge, not hygge, Hookah, or versions of that. So hygge. But there's another Danish word, Toot, that I also want to talk to you about today. So that's pronounced Toot, P-Y-T, Toot. And Toot was recently voted the most popular word by Danes, beating out other cool words such as dvæle, which means to linger, or the word krænkelsesparat, which means ready to take offense. So krænkelse means an offense and parat means ready, so ready to take offense. So Toot doesn't have an exact English translation. It's really more of a cultural concept about cultivating healthy thoughts to deal with stress. So I think the concepts that underpin the word Toot are applicable to people everywhere. So you could say Danes have the word, but we can all learn from the idea. So Toot is usually expressed as an interjection in reaction to a daily hassle, frustration, or mistake. It most closely resembles us saying, don't worry about it, stuff happens, or oh well. So you might break a glass in the kitchen, shrug, and say, Toot. You might see a parking ticket lodged under your windshield wiper, and just as you become hot with anger, you shake your head and murmur, Toot. So Toot is used both about your own minor transgressions, Toot, I shouldn't have said that, and about your own experiences, Toot, I missed the bus. At its core, Toot is about accepting and resetting. It's used as a reminder to step back and refocus rather than overreact. Instead of assigning blame, it's a way to let go and move on. So as I said, you might use Toot in response to something you yourself said or did. But what's interesting is that Danes also use it to support other people. So you might say to your coworker, oh, Toot, you shouldn't worry about that dumb comment in the meeting. So Toot can reduce stress because it's used in a sincere attempt to support other people and oneself in getting past minor daily frustrations that just for whatever reason seem to stick. So saying Toot is intended to be supportive, and in Danish, it's not used in a snarky or dismissive way, so you don't say, just get over it already so we can all move on with our lives. Instead, it supports the idea that sometimes we should just let it go. And some researchers argue that knowing when to say Toot, for example, can create more job satisfaction in the workplace. There's, in fact, a rich strain of psychological research devoted to understanding how we interpret and react to other people's actions. So psychological research shows that we are happier and we live longer when we have fewer daily hassles. And in some cases, what constitutes a hassle might be tied to how we interpret what's happening around us. Toot can help people avoid the tendency to blame others. Say you're late to an appointment and there's a person in front of you who's driving slowly. I'm sure you've all experienced this. It can feel really irrationally personal. Why is this person personally blocking me from getting to my appointment? But research shows that we get angrier when we explain someone's behavior by pointing to their incompetence, their intentionality, or their poor character. Or, as psychologists call it, when we make a dispositional attribution. We explain other people's actions through their internal characteristics. But by saying Toot, you're actually deciding that it's not worth it to let someone else's actions, which are out of your control anyway, bother you. It's water off a duck's back. Of course, it's not enough to just say Toot. You also have to actually mean it. So you might want to add other strategies, such as you could consider the situational constraints. Maybe the driver was ill or distracted or disabled, or there was something else in this situation that you had not considered. Another strategy is to appreciate what good things in your life were not affected. Maybe you still had a great morning, even though the driver was driving slowly, or maybe you made your appointment, actually. Another strategy is to think about whether it really is a problem. Sure, it's irritating, but is it an actual problem? And one last strategy that I personally like is to think about whether this will be an issue in 2 hours, in 2 days, or in 2 weeks. So all of these strategies can help you put your frustrations into perspective. So, of course, you wouldn't say Toot in response to being seriously wronged. And the word shouldn't be used when you yourself ought to take responsibility or maybe even apologize. And Toot shouldn't be used as an excuse for inaction. Also, people who teach positive psychology have written about in Denmark how applying Toot to too many aspects of one's life isn't healthy, especially if the areas concern your own core needs or values. So letting go of daily frustrations can, of course, be facilitated by doing other things like walking in nature, doing yoga, meditation, listening to music, exercising, keeping a journal, engaging in creative work. So those are all good strategies that can help. Or you could get a Toot button. So interestingly, in Denmark, teachers actually use a Toot button to teach their students how to let go. It can be a bottle cap up on a sign with the word Toot-knap, Toot button written on it. And many Danish teachers find that it can help children cope with smaller frustrations. I lost the game, I can't find my favorite pencil. And it fundamentally helps to teach them that everything can't be and shouldn't be perfect. Of course, it is hard to accept that everything is not fair and everyone can make a mistake. That's hard for children as well as for adults. And these are important skills to learn. Research shows that perfectionism is related to worry and depression. And at the same time, self-compassion and social support can help prevent perfectionism from leading to these negative outcomes like worry and depression. In fact, in recent years, the Toot button has also become popular among Danish adults who can either make one at home or they can buy one that when pressed says Toot, 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 and then it says, tag en dyb indånding, det går nok det hele, which means breathe deeply, it will all be okay. So that's how you can put some Toot in your own life. It might reduce your stress and increase your happiness. All right, so now I will take your questions.
So Marie, our first question, has to do with education in the United States. Are you aware of any similar movements with of a similar concept or word or system that we have in the United States to teach children a similar lesson, or is there any interest in that?
I think that I'm sure that teachers incorporate into their own lesson plans trying to help children not focus so much on perfectionism or deal with daily frustrations. I've never heard of anything like a Toot, and I have Googled it a lot and looked at different perspectives on it. So that exact idea of having a single word that signals to you that this is the time to let go. And what's important too is that everything is not Toot, right? You shouldn't say Toot to everything. You should say Toot to these minor grievances that are ultimately not important.
Mm-hmm. All right. Any additional questions from people? There should be a question mark if anybody would like to write in a question.
But while you guys are writing in some questions, I can tell you some more about happiness, which actually has a lot of interest. So one thing I would have to say as a psychologist is that the happiness rankings are often dismissed as being not important or not measured correctly and not relevant, which I would definitely disagree with. So social psychologists have studied happiness for over 30 years, and many governments, including the UK, the European Council, the US, measure happiness because they think that it's an important additional measure to evaluate their programs or consider the cost benefit of policy interventions. So it can actually be measured well and relatively accurately. It's also backed up, of course, with other objective measures such as other measures of standard of living, access to healthcare, access to education, and so on. And psychologists also affirm aspects of happiness like trust by actually dropping wallets and see whether they are returned, or asking people whether they think that they can trust other people.
We have our next question. Isn't there a benefit to people thinking they are happy? If the data is wrong, can we still make a decision based on this result?
That's a great question. So the question is really fundamentally asking whether people have access to their own states of being. So of course, anyone who's ever asked a survey question thinks that that's true, right? So when you go to the restaurant and you fill out a survey saying how much you liked your meal or the service, we're all fundamentally assuming that you have access internally about those beliefs. And so in that way, your own access to your own beliefs about your happiness, of course, a valid expression of your own assessment. So at the surface of it, we do think in our world, I think that having people ask questions about their happiness, and they've been asked in a variety of different ways. So they asked about, are you generally satisfied? They never ask about happy, by the way. They never use the word happy. Psychologists call this term subjective well-being. So they asked about how satisfied are you at work? So think about that, all of you listening in. You could probably pretty well answer the question, how satisfied are you at work right now? Or this week or this month in general, how satisfied are you at home? How satisfied are you in your social life? And just overall, how satisfied are you with your life? So we do think that people have access to these feelings, can report them. Some research also just asks about affect, so positive and negative affect, so emotions of how happy, content, upset, anxious you are, and those often correlate very well with people's assessment of their own happiness.
Is there a placebo effect to happiness?
So that's a good question. So it kind of goes to the same idea. So if you think you are happy, but you are not happy, then you still reap the benefits of happiness. But if you think you are happy, then aren't you happy? So can you be faked into thinking you are happy? I mean, it's a little bit like asking the question: can you be faked into thinking that the waitress was nice when she in fact was mean? Well, so what matters is that you thought that the waitress did a good job, right? And what matters is that you are happy, and that has important outcomes to anxiety, stress, longevity, overall health. So people do like to argue about how to assess best subjective well-being. And right before I talked to you today, I actually looked up the 260-page manual that the OECD has put out that actually exactly addresses how to best measure it and how to validate it. And of course, like any other measurement, it's not a perfect assessment, but we nevertheless think that it can assess something in people that predicts their outcomes.
Has the impact of PIT on the recipient been studied?
That's a great question. So one of the things, so I studied cross-cultural psychology, and one of the questions, problems with both Toot and hygge is that because these words only exist in a specific cultural context, it's really hard to compare the effects in other cultures, right? So if you wanted to do a cross-cultural study, you couldn't ask Americans, how often do you say Toot, and does that work out for you? Because they would all say, wait, what? What are you asking about? Inside Denmark, I would say, so people often ask me whether Danes think that they're particularly happy, and they don't. They think that they are satisfied, which of course is what psychologists mean when they ask about happiness. I also sometimes ask whether they're themselves good at using the word Toot, and they say either I don't use it at all, or I'm terrible at it because these little frustrations just get under my skin and I'm not good at letting it go. So that would be a great research study, is to look at whether people's use of this particular word actually is associated with these other general psychological strategies that can reduce stress. So the suggestions I gave are basic strategies for reducing daily hassles, like taking a new perspective, making a situational attribution instead of a dispositional attribution of other people, and so on.
With all of the books on hygge, and I apologize for continuing to butcher these pronunciations, what is the best source to learn about how to incorporate Danish happiness into our own American lives?
So you can, of course, read my articles on it. So I have 2 pieces in the conversation, it's called. It's a free online source. More details about these ideas. It's a little bit overwhelming. If you go in on Amazon and type in hygge, you actually get more than 900 books. So many people have thought about an expressed hygge, and I would also say it's a little bit confusing, and this of course often happens in cross cultural translation of words, is that it really does get mistranslated to just mean having a cup of coffee in front of a fireplace, which is really just a misunderstanding of what it means and how it's incorporated into Danish culture. So Danes actually use the word all the time. They say something was hyggeligt, maybe a dinner. They say that a house, your new house is so hyggeligt, meaning that it's well done or creates this kind of sense of intimacy. But of course, again, that doesn't mean that Americans don't take deliberate action, even though they don't have the word, that would create the same atmosphere. So perhaps you have all created a dinner party that would use a lot of the same elements of hygge as a Dane would. Maybe you had dimmed lighting, you had candles, you put effort into having a delicious meal, you sat around the table, you made an effort to put away your devices so that no one was distracted. And basically everyone arrived with the expectation that this was worth investing your emotional energy into creating this intimacy. So I think Americans do a lot of things that Danes would call hygge. And I think Americans do a lot of things in trying to let go of daily frustrations, even though they don't use the word Toot. So I don't know that Danes are definitely very, very good at hygge. I don't know that they're particularly good at Toot. All right, while you guys are writing another question, let me address another question that actually often comes up, and that is that people think that Danes in America, the US and Denmark just can't be compared at all, and that the differences in these happiness ratings are meaningless because American is diverse and big, and Denmark is small and less diverse. So just on the question of diversity, there's actually absolutely no research that shows that more homogeneous countries in which there's less diversity, that people are happier in those countries. So whether you measure diversity in terms of multiple language spoken or multiple religions or ethnicity or race or immigrant, none of those being happy or more or less happy. So the factors that make Danes happy are in fact the factors that make everyone happy. So the reason that Americans in these rankings are less happy than Danes, the US in the last one I think was 14th, and Denmark was 3rd, I believe, is that Americans have low trust. They have low trust in each other, in government. They have low trust in, they have higher corruption. And there's very high social inequality in income. So income inequality is one of the things that make people feel that the world is not just and that they don't have a fair shot at life and success. And that, of course, does make people happy. So what's fascinating about the happiness research, I think, is that it's actually the same variables that predict the same outcomes in vastly different countries.
Maria, I think that might be it for the questions.
All right. Well, thank you guys for listening in. And you can have your hand at Amazon to look for hygge or stress, or you can get a brief summary of what I talked about today in my 2 pieces on the conversation. That's the name of the website, or you can just Google my last name and hygge and you'll find them. So thank you.
And thank you, Marie. And I think that we can send an email out to everybody with the links to those articles and hopefully a copy of the webinar as well. So thank you all very much for joining us today.
Bye-bye.